Well, thank you guys for inviting us to come talk to you about our program. I'm Sherelle Owens. I manage our program for Kids Services at Multnomah County Developmental Disabilities. And with me we have...
I'm a program specialist senior.
And I'm Mary Getzinger. I'm an eligibility specialist, clinical services specialist.
Okay, and so we're Multnomah County Developmental Disability Services, and we are what you call a community developmental disability program. We have a program here in Multnomah County, but really the services that people get through developmental disabilities can be received throughout the state, through the counties, or through the Community Developmental Disability Program. So I'm here today to talk about what we provide in Multnomah County, but what you should know is that all the services that we provide, if an individual transfers to another county or moves to another county, those same services can be received in that other county. You would just go through their Community Developmental Disability Program. And Multnomah County is a community developmental disability program that hires service coordinators, sometimes we call them case managers, to provide case management services to children with intellectual and/or adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Our goal is to increase overall quality of life, promote independence and integration into the community by providing resource linkage and in-home and community supports for individuals who have developmental disabilities. Our program is voluntary. Families can decline our services at any time, and this is even if it's court-ordered. Our program really is voluntary, and so if you want our services, you can access it. If you don't, you don't have to. If you begin services with us and then decide they're not beneficial or helpful for you, you can decline and withdraw from services. We work in teams. We collaborate with community programs. We collaborate with DCJ, community justice, child welfare, mental health programs, community programs. We work in teams to be able to really provide what we would like to call a wrap-around support to that individual with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Courts, CASAs, other members of the child's natural network of support. It's really just about what is it that this individual needs to help us reach the goal of community inclusion. And through that, when you come into our program and are made eligible, each child is assigned, or each individual is assigned, a service coordinator, and that service coordinator's role is to begin working with them to help link them to services. So what does a service coordinator do? They work in collaboration with the client and their team to identify ways to support them throughout the year. They help develop an annual support plan or an individual support plan, and really this is just a fancy way of saying a plan that's developed for that year that looks at all the needs that that person has, and then the case manager or the service coordinator's job is to help address what those needs were. So this annual plan looks at things like what's working for this individual, what's not working, what kinds of supports are necessary, what are their goals. And so when you have a team approach, you have a CASA or you have an attorney or you have child welfare workers or you have family members or mental health support present, everybody brings a different perspective on what this child or adult may need for services, and it's directed though by the guardian and by the client to really design what's really going to be tailored for me, and then service coordinator, can you please help make this happen? Examples of resources we provide are listed there. Help in the home with activities of daily living, respite, family training, behavior consultation, community inclusion opportunities, sometimes specialized equipment, adaptive equipment, if necessary, help in locating out-of-home placement, and any other services needed to reach the supports identified in that plan that we're calling the annual plan or the individual service plan. Service coordinators assist in coordinating emergency interventions, and I phrase it that way, but other ways to phrase it is when a crisis arises, how do we support that family? How do we support that individual? So it's the service coordinator's job to intervene at the point of crisis, to really try to mitigate it with the hope of keeping the child at home. We, service coordinators, participate as a liaison between the child and the school. They guide and support the child and the family to plan for the future. They assist in creating a transition plan that is meaningful to the child and the family. And they monitor health and safety, financial record keeping, medication, and other supports for the clients who are in foster care. Yeah.
You had mentioned you also assist with locating an out-of-home placement. At what types of placements do you find, or do people request?
So when I'm talking about assisting with out-of-home placement, our goal is to keep the child at home. And I'm really emphasizing children's services because this is the program that I manage, but our program is adult and children. But our goal is to really keep the child at home. But in a situation where that child is not able to maintain at home for several reasons, then we begin to look at what are placements that can happen to assist. So it could be temporarily out of home just for respite purposes in a foster home. It could be longer. It could be more permanently looking at foster home placement, or it could be residential placement, things like that. So it's really just what can we do to preserve a family-style, community-focused environment for the individual, for the child, with the hope of really being able to keep the child at home. But if not, those are ideas and options of what we can look for. Yeah.
On the last bullet, monitors health, safety, financial record keeping, and so on. Specifically, how does that monitoring occur? In other words, for instance, with health, is there some kind of standard care that is expected, or what? How is that monitored?
So all the services that we provide, including monitoring for health and safety, are designed and described in what we call the Oregon Administrative Rule. And in the Oregon Administrative Rule, it has a guide for what it is we're to monitor to and how we're supposed to monitor. And so when we have our service coordinators go into the homes, we go with the idea of what the Oregon Administrative Rule has already designed for us, and then we monitor to those standards. And of course, within our own systems, we have procedures that help us apply what the standards in the OAR say. So we may come with a checklist of how many bedrooms are in the home, or how many kids are in the bedroom, or do you have everything up to date, or things locked, or, so we have our systems and processes in place to look at that the rule that the OAR sets for us, but it's really driven by what the standards are in the OAR.
Is that available publicly to
It is.
look at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you go to the state website, they have a forms page and they have a link. And if you just pull out the DHS website and type in Oregon Administrative Rule, Community Developmental Disabilities Program, you should be able to find it and navigate through those to find rules around monitoring for health and safety.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Continuing on with what service coordinators do, the service coordinator emphasizes the importance of person-centered planning when working with agencies and the client support team. And I've listed here some principles of what person-centered planning include: looking at what areas are meaningful and relevant to the individual and their family, emphasizing the strengths of the family and the child, exploring how to increase the client's own ability to manage challenges by focusing on their areas of strength, and focusing on how to keep children in their natural environment or their family home and facilitate increased community inclusion and supports. The idea for person-centered planning really is driven from what is it that the individual is hoping for, what are their goals, what are their ideas, what do they want, how to support them in being able to be included in their community. And so a lot of times, especially as we get to transitional periods of 18, 19, 20, this is really important because we don't want to lose the individual, the client's perspective on what kind of services they want and what it is that they want to do. Oftentimes we can have guardians or parents, want to really drive a process, or caseworkers or case managers really want to drive the process, and so we really try to promote and emphasize that this is really a person-centered approach. Continuing on, at a minimum, the service coordinator meets yearly with families and teams to create a family support plan. Now, this is for individuals who live at home in their biological home or their natural family home. not in a foster home or a residential setting. The service coordinator has specialized training and experience working with individuals impacted by developmental and intellectual disabilities. They are a great resource of knowledge and expertise in the field of intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they conduct, and this is kind of what we were talking about just a little bit ago, monitoring visits monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and/or annually, and this is all as outlined in the Oregon administrative rules. And so as we start to see more, the higher frequency in the types of monitorings, that begins to talk about individuals who don't live at home, but rather live in an out-of-home placement. And so this is in accordance with the Oregon administrative rule. So not only how often do you go into the home to monitor for several things, but when you're in the home, the foster home, the residential setting, et cetera, to what are you monitoring to? All of those things are identified in the Oregon administrative rule. What I have on the next slide are just quick snapshots of different ways that we can monitor and or support an individual through case management, and this is the standard by which we measure what we do. So when we are talking about how do you know that the services are being rendered in the way that you want them to, or how do you identify what the services are that you want to deliver, is it happening from a person-centered approach? These are the standards by which we're looking at that. And the way that we kind of pull that together are with a family support plan. We call it an annual plan. And like I said, that's the plan that really designs what the service coordinator is going to be doing throughout the year to support that individual. Long-term support planning to divert from crises. Short-term support planning to divert from crises. There's a program called Children's Intensive In-Home Services, and that's a heightened level of support needed that can be provided to children who can be pretty behaviorally or medically fragile that need some intensive in-home support. We have something called personal care support, which is funded through Medicaid. It provides in-home support with a provider for activities of daily living that support can be helped with. Locating, certifying, and funding DD foster homes and other out-of-home placements when they're needed. Monitoring services to children in foster care, this is permanently or temporarily, to ensure continuity of services, health and safety, and provision of needed supports. And then high school transition and brokerage support planning.
So this is in addition to, sorry. So this is in addition to the DHS caseworker?
Right.
Who is also at the same time monitoring similar things, is that right?
Right. So this is in addition to the DHS caseworker, and when Beth gets up, she'll be able to give a little bit more specifics about what some of the things are that happen through the, not just the monitoring process, but just what happens when children are in foster care from the perspective of developmental disabilities, because what we're monitoring to and what child welfare is monitoring to, the DHS caseworker, are different. And when you have DD take over the process for the primary case management, because we co-manage an individual, a child, we have more things that we have to look for, pay attention to, support around, that we have to monitor to. So this would be in addition to that. But often we work in tandem. And then lastly, our demographics. Our program, so this is the Multnomah County Developmental Disability Program in total, not just over Kids Services, but total. We serve 4,400 adults and children who live in Multnomah County impacted by intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have approximately 70 service coordinators. Like I said, we also call them case managers, with individual caseloads ranging between 35 and 55 individuals per caseload. The Children and Young Adults program serves children, youth, teens, and young adults ages birth through 18 and is currently responsible for more than 1,300 individuals. Of the children in the program, about 15% of the children that I spoke about live on out-of-home placements. And on average, we transition approximately 50 young adults a year to our adult case management program. And so what I did is I just gave you a really quick snippet of the overview of what Multnomah County Developmental Disabilities Services is and what our Community Developmental Disability Program does. with the focus that our goal is really about full inclusion, enhanced quality of life, and really supporting the child with a total holistic approach. And so I'll have Beth come up and talk more specifically about what may probably be most applicable to you. I just wanted to kind of give you a quick overview.
So developmentally challenged people are particularly vulnerable to abuse.
Absolutely.
Especially sexual abuse.
Absolutely.
And so do you take special actions to monitor for that problem in this population?
So we specifically monitor for several kinds of things, to include individuals who can be easily preyed upon. And we take that very seriously. And one of the things that we do when we recognize the propensity or the potential for that to occur in that annual planning process, we have some safety protocols and some safety plans in place that the team helps to design to try to ensure the safety of that individual. And at the point, one of the things that we have to monitor to is the plan. So once we've designed what those safety protocols should look like and what the plan should look like, then on a very regular basis, whether it be quarterly, monthly, et cetera, we have to monitor to the fact that they are actually being delivered in the way that the plan designed for them to be delivered for. So absolutely.
So just a quick specific question. If a child who's developmentally challenged is in foster care, do the foster parents get babysitters? Let's say they get babysitters from their church. Is there any effort to make sure that those babysitters are safe for those kids?
Absolutely. So when you talked about DHS monitoring for children as well as DD monitoring for children, what I can tell you is one of the things that DD has to monitor to is the fact that everybody who is going to be a part of, whether short-term or long-term, the child's interaction, including providing any direct support, supervision, et cetera, has to be criminally background checked. And not only do they have to be criminally background checked, they have to be criminally background checked to a standard that is really, really high. And we have to monitor that criminal background check history every 2 years. And so it has to happen very regularly.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi, so my name is Beth McHugh, and I'm the Program Specialist Senior for Children's Services at Multnomah County. And what I'm going to talk about is, I think, probably where your work intersects with DD services. And so where you probably run into DD services a lot, or children who are in the custody, oh, I didn't change this. Children who are in the custody of child welfare and who are in foster care, and then they become eligible for DD services. And so what will happen oftentimes is a child will be in foster care, they'll be found eligible for DD services, they'll be assigned a case manager, and then that's when we start to work with child welfare about what the next step of the plan is going to be. And it can either be you're going to stay in that same foster home that you live in, and DD is going to take over the service payment for you, and we're going to now be responsible for your foster care placement. Child welfare is still your guardian, but DD, it takes over the monitoring and the foster care payment. Maybe you're found eligible for DD services and you can't stay living in that same home. And then DD will help look for a specialized DD foster home that might have a little bit more training, a little bit more specialized services. And then the other option into our services is voluntary care, where you're not even involved with child welfare at all. For some reason that the child needs to be placed outside of the family home. So there's some things that are the same and some things that are different when you're found eligible for DD services. Child welfare will pay you a service payment as a foster provider. When you come over to DD services, DD will do a rate tool assessment, and then we are then responsible for paying the service payment. And I kind of put this up here because I think with you guys being in CRB, what you'll probably run into is reviewing cases and reviewing plans about, well, who's going to be responsible for the kid going to camp in the summer? Who is paying for all the respite care? And when a child is in DD services and when DD is making that service payment, it's a little bit different. We put everything in the foster care rate. I know child welfare has an assessment, and then they'll have separate line items for, oh, access some respite, or try to access some clothing vouchers, things like that. When you're in with DD services, we have one service payment that is supposed to cover all that. We also pass through the SSI to the foster provider, and that's your room and board. That should be helping to pay for things like your clothes, school trips, different things like that. And I'm just kind of putting that in there because I think those are the things that come up sometimes in review hearings. Who is supposed to be responsible for what things? So this is kind of a continuation of the payment. That the state will become a child's SSI payee, pass through the money to the foster care provider. You know, just thinking about what you had said, sir, a couple minutes ago with children in foster care, and if somebody from church was going to babysit for somebody, and what Sherelle said is very true. Anyone who's going to be, you know, if a foster parent is going to have somebody do babysitting, they have to be criminal history checked. The other thing is, we want children to have as normal as a life as possible. So sometimes if you're going to go to a sleepover at a friend's, sometimes people aren't criminal checked. But if you're going to take care of the child in the home, you'd have to go through that child welfare certifier, the person who certifies your home, and be criminal history checked to be a paid provider in that home. Because those are some of the things that come up too at CRBs, like can this child who's in foster care, can they have sleepovers at a friend's house? Yes, absolutely they should. Can they go to summer camp? Different things like that can come up. Okay, so one thing that you guys might run into too is recently in 2011, due to different administrative rules and rules, DD cannot pay relatives. Cannot pay relative foster care for children. If you were in foster care and you lived with a relative before 2011, that's staying in place. No changes have been made yet. But if you're found eligible for DD services and you're living with your grandmother, DD will not take over the foster care payment for that child. And that has been coming up recently. Or so what we'll need to talk about is, if it's the most appropriate thing for the child to stay living with the relative, which it most always is, then you'll stay with child welfare. You'll still have a DD case manager, but you won't make the jump over to a DD service payment. If you then need to move out of the relative's house, or if your care needs increase, DD would be involved with looking for a different placement. This is just more about relative foster care, because I wouldn't be surprised if some of you guys have run into this in review boards or people talking about planning for the child being able to return home, who can't be the foster care payment. Another thing that DD will be involved with in tandem with child welfare is what is going to be the long-term plan for the child. Is the plan to return home to your biological family? And if that's the case, what can DD do in the family home to help with the return home plan? Can you go back home and then access some respite? Are you going to need some in-home support to make the return home successful? Will you be adopted, maybe by the foster parent that you're living with, or maybe you'll go to committee to be adopted by another family? And then what can DD offer along that planning process? Or is the person going to end up being in permanent foster care? And sometimes children who are in permanent foster care will then jump to our adult services at age 18. Another time where you guys probably hear a lot of different things is about when the person is going to be turning 18. And if they're turning 18 and still in foster care, what does that mean? If you're turning 18 and you're eligible for DD services, there's a couple different options that are available. You can be found eligible as an adult in DD services, and Mary's going to talk about that a little bit more. And that means there's different doors that might be open for long-term living in an adult foster home, living in an adult group home, living in supported living, where you could have your own apartment with supports that are in place, or maybe the plan is to stay with your foster provider that you've been living with for many years. And if that's the case, your foster provider will need to jump through some hoops, do some different things to maybe become adult licensed so that the child can continue to live in their home past 18. And this is really important for teams to really be planning for when a person is going to turn 18, starting at age 16, 17. What is the goal? What are the options that are available? What does that young person want to do? And then it's up to the team to kind of fit in behind that. How can we make that happen? Sometimes, this is just something like with CRB and families, sometimes when someone's approaching 18 and they're in foster care, and maybe they're 16, 17, and sometimes families who have been trying for, the goal is, we are going to get our child home. We are going to get our child home no matter what. We want to return home. Sometimes around age 16 or 17, you can kind of start to turn that conversation to, okay, well, let's really think about this. If you return home to your bio family at age 16 or 17, what's eligible? What doors are open for you at 18 or 19? If you're in services with developmental disabilities, can it turn to where now child welfare may actually step out after age 18, and now it's a voluntary placement? The person is 18, 19, 20 years old and living in a foster home or in supported living. So kind of around that age, a lot of times teams will even sort of switch their thinking as to what is the long-term goal. Are the parents fighting against child welfare? Can now the parents kind of take more of a, oh wait, I want to plan for what's going to come next in my child's life? So 18 is a really, really important time. I think that's kind of what I said. And then you'll also run into a lot of times children who have been in foster care for a number of years and approach 18. They're determined to just get the heck out. And no matter what the adults are saying, they are determined, I'm gonna forget about child welfare. I'm either gonna move home, I'm gonna move out on my own, I'm gonna move with my boyfriend. And there's services available then too. There's a thing called brokerage services. If you exit comprehensive services, there are brokerage services available to people who live in the community, who live with their family, who live independently. So there is it's a very important time to just talk about all the different options that may or may not be eligible for somebody. Mm-hmm.
It seems like this would be the time when issues around competency would come up, and that you'd have to deal with competency hearings. Is that true?
That is true. That's what will happen oftentimes is child welfare can stay somebody's guardian all the way until 21. A lot of times people think, well, if someone has a developmental disability, then who's going to be their guardian next? Who's going to step in and be their guardian? Many people are their own guardian at age 18, 19, 20 when child welfare steps out. And if they have a case manager, if they're living with a foster provider, if there's a team of people around them, they don't necessarily need to have a legal guardian. People can be their own guardian with a team helping them make decisions about how to proceed.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Really dumb. What does it mean to live through a brokerage or with service? What is a brokerage? What is that?
A brokerage service is for people who basically are not in comprehensive services. What happened a number of years ago is people who live in foster care or group homes, they access that service through Medicaid. And a number of years ago, there was a lawsuit where everybody else who had Medicaid said, hey, I'm not living in a group home or a foster home. How come I can't get this level of care? And the state settled and said not everybody can access this level of care, but everybody can access brokerage services. And that means everybody who is over 18, has Medicaid, either lives on their own or with their family and is eligible for DD services can access this amount of services. And it tends to be in-home supports. It tends to be help with shopping, groceries, budgeting. It can pay for you to go to a day program. It can pay for respite for your family. It depends on what's needed. But it's services in the community. You don't live in a foster home or a group home. Is that my last thing? Oh, the last thing, and then Mary's going to talk more about eligibility. But another thing that will come up very often is as a person approaches 18, they have to have their DD eligibility redone. At the same time, people who are 18 and are in DD services and have been receiving SSI have their SSI eligibility redetermined. And those two things are very important when it comes to planning and what's going to be next for this young adult, because sometimes a person will be found eligible for DD services but not eligible for SSI, and then that shoots you off into one problem-solving direction. Sometimes you'll be found not eligible for DD services after you've been in DD foster care for a while. Then we're planning with child welfare about possibly taking back service payments, moving to different foster homes. So not that you guys would ever need to know all these details, but just to know as you're hearing cases for people who are approaching 18, to just have it in your mind like, hey, have you guys thought of all these different variables? I've heard that there's eligibility, that there's SSI, that there's decisions about where you're going to live. But those are kind of the big things to kind of keep in mind. And then I think Mary's going to talk more about the specifics of eligibility for all ages, and then at age 18, what that means too.
Okay. So this is the Oregon administrative rule that's specific to the DD eligibility. So if you wanted to reference that at some point, you can. It is statewide. All of us eligibility specialists follow the exact same rule. So we also always honor each other's eligibility. So if somebody's made eligible in Clackamas County and moves into Multnomah County, we're going to receive that eligibility. We won't make a different determination. So I'll start with the application process. And this is for any individual, any age. They need to complete a statewide application for services. They need to be an Oregon resident. They need to apply in the county where the guardian lives. And so in the Portland metropolitan area, that can be kind of confusing. So if the guardian lives in Multnomah County, but the child's in a foster care, say a relative foster care placement in Clackamas County, you need to apply in Multnomah County. If that guardianship, is relinquished for some reason, and then guardianship goes back to the parent or whoever lives in Clackamas County, we would transfer eligibility then to Clackamas County. The application needs to be signed and dated, and you need to be, the person who you're applying for needs to be a U.S. citizen or at least a permanent resident. So there are two different ways that folks are eligible for our program. One is due to an intellectual disability, which is IQ driven, and I'll get into more specifics about that. The other way a person is eligible is due to a developmental disability, which is a neurological condition, and I'll go into what that means too. So intellectual disability. You might hear ID being thrown around a lot more. ID is synonymous with MR. So because of stigma related to mental retardation, there's been a shift. The DSM that's coming out later this month will say intellectual developmental disability. It won't list mental retardation anymore. Schools are no longer for their IEP eligibility, no longer saying mental retardation. It's all intellectual disability. And intellectual disability is a significant sub-average general intellectual functioning. It's IQ. So it's IQ 75 and under. And we kind of break up ID eligibility. We break it up into folks who are 65 and under. They may not require what's called an adaptive assessment, and I'll talk about what an adaptive assessment is. But for folks who are kind of in the borderline range, 65 to 75, we always need concurrent adaptive functioning, an assessment of that, and I'll go through what that is. With intellectual disability, we want to see that it was in place prior to age 18. And for kids, that's not difficult because they're often under 18. A developmental disability, that spans a little bit older, until they're older, to age 22. And I can just peek down here. Developmental disability is a medical or clinical diagnosis of a neurological condition. And what we need to look for, or if you're talking to a team, this comes up a lot with fetal alcohol kids, is we need it to actually be a diagnosis of, say, fetal alcohol syndrome or fetal alcohol effects. It can't be a rule out. It can't be a possible, probable, likely, maybe. Those terms don't work very well for us. We need an actual clinical diagnosis of the syndrome. A DED diagnosis needs to be expected to be indefinite, and we need to have significant impairments in adaptive behavior, and I'll go into that. And the reason for the deficits or the delays in functioning need to be because of the condition. It can't be primarily related to, say, trauma or mental health. It needs to be a direct relation to the neurological condition. And then lastly, a person to be eligible with DD needs to require supports and training similar to a person with an intellectual disability, and that's kind of vague and confusing. I have a slide about it, so we'll talk about it, but it's kind of confusing. So here are some of the more frequently occurring DD conditions that we see. CP, PDD, that would be your children with autism, Asperger's, Rett's, the fetal neurological disorder, so alcohol, drug, fetal alcohol, fetal drug effects. And then acquired brain injury or traumatic brain injury. And those actually have a cutoff of 22 for our program. So if somebody acquires or has a brain injury at age 20, they could be eligible. If they have it at 23, they would not be eligible. Sure.
I don't see spina bifida on that list.
Spina bifida is one. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, counties keep their own lists, and there are lots of them. There are different chromosomal abnormalities, and what we do, and like I'm working with a family right now, and they're being a case study for this very rare genetic condition. We are relying upon their professional team to talk to us. We'll send them questions specific to our rule, and they'll fill that out, or we'll use like the National Institute of Health to determine if somebody will qualify. Adaptive behavior. So adaptive behavior is the degree to which an individual meets the standards of personal independence and social responsibility expected for their age and their culture group. It's really looking at, what skills do they have? Are they able, to ambulate? Can they walk? Are they talking appropriately for their age? Able to engage in self-care, community use, and self-direction. And how we measure this is we do a lot of evaluations for eligibility for DD. So a qualified professional, being a psychologist or school psychologist, would do what's called an adaptive behavior assessment. It's a standardized measure. It's a third-party rating of a child. And this is actually a significant part of our eligibility determination. So what it is it's, say it's for a child in foster care. The team would want to come together and really make sure that they're selecting the right person to be the adaptive respondent, because it can quite literally make the decision about if somebody would be eligible or not. And what that person's going to be asked, they'll either be interviewed by the psychologist or they'll be given the questions for them just to fill out on their own. And it's a lot of questions, and it's about a lot of different areas of functioning. So does somebody pick clothing that's appropriate for the weather? That would be an example. Are they able to cook? Can they do, I don't know, it's a whole series of different things. And so you want to, as a team, make sure that the person who's rating the child knows the child well, and also can compare that child to typically developing children. Sometimes we see that, if somebody's only around children who have significant delays, they may overrate that child because they are showing skills that are high for the population that person's consistently working with, but really if you compared them to a typically developing kids, they would be quite lower. Significant impairment, that's what they have to have, and that's measured by, it's all score driven, similar to IQ, and it's a composite score of at least 2 standard deviations below the norm. So these assessment tools, they all have composites, and then they have domain scores. We're looking to see if they're 70 or below, and at least the composite, and if not in the composite, then in 2 domain scores. Training and supports, that's kind of vague. They've made it more specific by tying it directly to this adaptive assessment. So to meet the rule requirement for training and support needs, they need to have one of the domains on that adaptive assessment be at least 70 or below. And redeterminations. So this is a significant period, especially, you know, in line with what Beth was talking about with turning 18. Eligibility happens when somebody, you know, first comes in. If they come in as a 2-year-old into DD, we're going to make them eligible from the time they're 2 until about 6. And then we're going to look at their eligibility again. We're going to look at their school age eligibility. School age eligibility lasts from age 7, 6, 7, all the way until 18 if you're eligible because you're of an intellectual disability, or 22 if it's a developmental disability. And we're going to start the redetermination process 1 year prior. And what that means is there's one of my coworkers, she does all of our redeterminations, and she begins to send out releases to the schools. She's sending out releases to their doctors. She's trying to gather as much information as she can about that person, or as much current information. We probably had information when we did the initial eligibility, but she's going to be looking for proof that they would continue to be eligible. We also do redeterminations. I'll use this piece is we will do a redetermination anytime we get new information. So say somebody's made, they have an IQ of 65, they're made eligible based on their intellectual disability at age 8, and then at age 14, we get a school record that says that their IQ was tested again and their IQ is now 76. We're going to, at that point, begin the redetermination process for this child because we have information that contradicts their eligibility. And at that point, they could be found no longer eligible. 15 minutes. When we find somebody not eligible, there's a hearings and appeal process, and this just highlights the appeals process. Anytime we make a decision that somebody's no longer eligible or isn't eligible, we contact the family or the guardian. We send them a notice. We also include in that notice the form. It's Form 443 for them to complete. One thing to note is that a DHS guardian can't actually complete the appeal form on behalf of that child. It needs to be done by a foster care or somebody, maybe they're a lawyer or somebody else, but it's a conflict of interest because we're all DHS employees, or it's a DHS decision. Yeah, we can help with filling out the form. It's 45 days. It's supposed to be turned in by 45 days. If not, sometimes they'll make exceptions.
I'm sorry, you guys are DHS employees?
We're not, but as a state program, Department of Human Services oversees child welfare and DD services. So on a bigger scale, we're county employees. Okay. But the rule is that correct? Is that how we're all? Yeah. And then here are the processes for if somebody were to contest a decision. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are different steps, and it's important as a team to get together, on behalf of that child and decide what's in the child's best interest. Do they actually believe we made a bad decision? And in that case, they can move forward and appeal it. Appeal is not really a great way to buy time. So that's it. And then my next slide is about options if a child is in a funded foster care placement with DD and is found to no longer be eligible, what their options are. And I think Beth is going to speak to that.
Well, in this one, we just were kind of talking about, we didn't know how specific we should get with you guys here, or if you wanted to, have you ever run into this where people are turning 18 and being found not eligible or eligible, and the planning process from there? So what will happen oftentimes is if a person is found not eligible for DD services anymore at age 18, then the team kind of needs to make a decision. First decision might be, oh, we all agree with this, and they're not eligible. There's nothing about this, so we need to, within a certain amount of time, make an alternative plan. Maybe they'll stay living in that foster home, and child welfare will continue to be their guardian and will take back the payment for the foster care. maybe the team decides, oh, this something was done wrong. We think that the test was done wrong, or we think there's further information that wasn't utilized. So the team will put in an appeal. And then the question is, does the person stay in paid services during that appeal? There is the possibility that if you stay in paid services, you continue to receive foster care during the whole state appeal, and if you lose, there is the possibility that the person could be held responsible for the Medicaid services they received. Many people still head down that path. There's not another option. They still head down that path. The person is found eligible, and it all back rolls, and it's okay. That there have been times when people have been found not eligible on appeal, and then from there you have to very quickly make a plan B. The other option that happens sometimes is you'll put in an appeal for services, but decide not to take that chance of staying in the paid service. And so maybe child welfare will take back your service payment and pay for the foster care placement while you do the DD appeal. And then if you win, we'll take back the payment. If you don't, child welfare has the payment going over here anyway. So, and again, not that you guys will remember all those specifics, but just as the review boards and as you're hearing cases about people approaching 18 or planning to go home or planning to have DD take over payment, just to kind of have some questions that you can ask, like questions about what is the team planning for, what's the long-term plan, will the child be remaining in DD services past 18, how independent can they be, can they live more independently, just those types of things.
So at about 17 and a half, do you start really, or 17, or what is the paperwork?
At 17, right? I mean, our system kind of is set up so there's a system that will pull your name at 17 for the eligibility people to start looking at it. And if you're found not eligible at 17, then you're not eligible. That doesn't mean that, oh shoot, you're going to not be eligible at 18. No, that means you've been found not eligible now. So the planning process will need to happen whether you're going to appeal or change plans or move at that time.
And the eligibility worker who's working on the redetermination, when they start getting information, they're talking to the service coordinator. So they're also, I mean, they're going to say, hey, the new data is not really supporting eligibility. We haven't made a decision yet, but the team should know this.
Yeah. And then also just for like you guys to realize that it's such an important time when Mary was talking about things like adaptive tests and who's going to answer these questions, those are so imperative and so important to what options are going to be available for that person for the next step of their life. So it's not the kind of test like, oh yeah, we just got it and filled it out really quick and sent it back in. Those are it's a very important time. Any other questions, or have you guys heard anything that you've run into that sounds different from what we've said, or?
So I think it's correct to say that there are kids who have severe or significant disabilities, but they're not intellectual or developmental. But they would benefit from most, if not all, of the services provided here, even so. So how did it come about that those kids were excluded from obtaining these services?
Do you mean people with physical disabilities, or what do you mean?
Yes, physical disabilities.
Well, I mean, through child welfare, there are medical homes for different children, but this is just for developmental disabilities. I'm not sure.
Well, so my wife works at Shriners Hospital, and there appears to be a lot more services available if DD gets involved than if DD sees kids who have severe disabilities, maybe osteogenesis imperfecta, for instance. You know, they may be severely disabled, but they're not intellectually impaired in any way.
One of the ways that I can answer that, and you're absolutely right, I can tell you that there are so many children and adults too who would truly benefit from being able to have access to different types of supports, and some of them are supports that we provide. But what I can say is the supports that we provide are developmentally disability specific. And so if you're in our program and you don't have that neurological pervasive condition, some of the resources and the supports that we have won't really be tailored to you. And so it'll be more beneficial to connect you with a program that actually has a program that's specific for what your service needs are. One of the things that I can say, for example, is not just medically, but from a mental health standpoint, there are children who are really impacted with some pretty significant mental health conditions and mirror children who have neurological conditions that are developmentally driven. But for example, our program, our service coordinators or case managers don't come with the licensure and the credentialing and the ability to support, let's say, from a mental health perspective, what that child may need. And so having you be referred to our program for the supports that we provide, but can't speak to your condition from a mental health standpoint, can't speak to your condition from a psychiatric standpoint, can't provide you with the medication management and oversight, we're going to underserve you. And so our job would be, if someone was referred to us who didn't meet our criterion, to look at the eligibility place, to look to see, okay, but what is out there that actually can support you, that can be a benefit to you, and let's try to link you there so that you can actually have a support that's going to be more tailored to what your needs are.
Okay, so my perception is that there are better services available if you qualify for DD than if you don't. But are you saying that perception isn't correct? That really services have been provided regardless of the disability to an equal level as far as you can?
Well, what I can say is that is a perception in some cases, but for the diagnosis that you described, which is a pretty significant medical diagnosis, we're not a medical program. And so the supports that you may need may be something that we can't provide. So even if you were referred to us...
No, that's fine. But I mean, why wasn't originally it's set up to say, all children with disabilities should have services available then divided into DD services versus non-DD services?
Historically, the program was really for adults first. Children came later. And so historically, this was a program designed because people were institutionalized who had developmental disabilities and were not able to live at home and were not able to be in their community. And as a result of many lawsuits and many people saying, hey, that's not okay. We should be able to have equal rights too, to live in our community and not be locked up in some type of an institution and forgotten about. We should be able to have services. And so from a lot of advocacy and support that happened for people who said, no, this isn't okay, a program evolved that really wrapped around the idea of full inclusion for people who also had developmental disabilities. And that was adult-driven at first. And later on, it began, hey, children need this kind of support too, because children are going to grow up and become adults in this environment. And so what are we going to do for our children? And so children's services came on later as a part of the total package of what can be provided for people with developmental disabilities. So that's where it came from.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Very specifically, I'm CASA, and I was recently assigned to a child who is 12 years old, has an IQ of 37, and she lives in Tillamook County, where I live. What would be, I don't think she's involved in this program. It has not been yet referred to this program. What would be the fastest way, what would be the most effective way to get her referred to this program? Do I need to go through the DHS caseworker? So
if this person has a legal guardian who's DHS Child Welfare, I'd recommend that legal guardian call the CDDP in Tillamook County and just say, hey, I want to see if we can get case management services for the person who you're speaking about. That would be the fastest way.
Okay.
And just to answer your question from earlier you wondered, based on some stuff that we talked about, are we county employees, are we state employees, especially around the question of child welfare worker not being able to appeal a decision that's found not eligible. So we're county employees tasked to make decisions on behalf of the department known as Department of Human Services. And so because we're a contracted entity that provides services on behalf of the department, any decision that we make according to the OAR is a decision that's made on behalf of the department. Therefore, the department made the decision, which is DHS, and as a result, you can't appeal against yourself, if that clarifies. Any more questions? Hey, you guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for letting us come talk to you about our program.